Have you ever wondered whether defensive fullbacks behave the same way as attacking fullbacks with defensive instruction and vice versa? You'll be surprised. Or have you ever asked yourself what happens when you man mark a player on the other side of the field? Is tight marking better than man marking? Does it matter how far up you place your defenders in the game plan? Does it make a big difference whether your player is a defensive midfielder or a central midfielder? All of this, including details to every single instruction and a lot more right now. Here comes Pepe. Welcome everybody! Let's begin by showing how the placement of players in the game plan influences how they actually behave in the game. For this, I use this base formation as the regular formation, an ordinary backline of 4 here. We will always compare this formation to whatever we're testing. As a sub-tactic, I use this formation here, which is crazy and quite comical. The left fullback is as far back as can be, the right one as far up as possible. The center backs are on the same side, but one is a lot further up than the other. Let's see how this translates into the game. Here, with the normal formation, the positioning isn't really special. We can already see that there is a difference in how far the fullbacks move up because one is further up than the other, despite them being at the same height in the game plan. The reason for this is pretty simple. They just move independently from each other, but depending on where your players and the ball are. Now we switch to the sub-tactic. No change for either fullback, but we can see that the left center back starts moving. Remember, this is the formation we've just switched to. The interesting thing here is, Cannavaro did make the move sideways, but did not move further up as the game plan shows, suggesting that when you have the ball, the horizontal placement of your defenders matters, the vertical not so far. Now if we move the ball around a little, we can see that Cannavaro moves up, but I think this is not because of the game plan, because here, when Griezmann has the ball, he's at the same height as Thuram again. It just happens sometimes. Let's see how things change with opponents being in place. Here is something very interesting. As you can see, we're still in the sub-tactic. When I passed behind my defenders to the keeper, the center backs changed position, suggesting that with the ball being behind, being a passing option is more important for the game than adhering to the game plan. If we get the ball past the defensive line, they take the same position again as before. As soon as we lose the ball, the defenders stop taking the weird positions from the sub-tactic. We can see Thuram immediately leaving the position to mark an opponent, just as Hiroki Ito. At the bottom, we see something interesting too. Wan-Bissaka is a little further up still, which leads to the game believing he's too far away to mark the player in his area. Therefore, the game sends Cannavaro to do this. As soon as Wan-Bissaka is close enough, he does the marking and Cannavaro takes a different spot. This shows that the defensive positioning depends more on the opponent's player than on the game plan. At this point, still crazy sub-tactic active, we actually observe that Cannavaro is in front of Thuram now, like the game plan would suggest. But again, I don't think this is the game plan. I think I can explain this. In the regular tactic, where the center backs are equally far up in the game plan, this position is also occupied, this time by the other center back, Thuram. It seems to be some sort of zonal marking mechanic relative to the opponents. I see it this way, that the opponent's attackers that are very far up, like this one here, get marked closely, whereas other opponents not that far up, such as this one here, this one, and this one, are also kind of assigned to a defender, but they don't get as close, but keep some distance. Not sure if this goes for all playstyles and situations, but for quick counter in this situation, this seems to be how it worked. You can even see it here, because I was lucky and the opponent's striker actually dropped back. Cannavaro doesn't chase him, but also keeps a similar distance now as the other defenders do. He even keeps up with the horizontal movement of the opponent, so it's quite obvious. Going back to the crazy sub-tactic will revoke this. Nobody is marking this guy. Both center backs right again. This basically means that when you have the ball, a player will only kind of shadow an opponent if the opponent is near his position of the game plan. So for this, the game plan actually does seem to matter. As soon as you lose the ball, however, the players will start marking regardless of the game plan, as we've seen. Another thing I tested was whether I could influence how far the defenders move up. For this, I compared the most far up possible defensive line against the one as far back as possible. To make it short, there was no real difference between the two tactics. Just like before, the defensive seems to move depending on the opponent's strikers rather than depending on the game plan. Let's check out how man marking influences the positioning of the defenders. For this, I went into the sub tactic and assigned my fullbacks to man mark the opponent's wingers. As man marking is a defensive instruction, it only works when the opponent's team has the ball. Without man marking, you can see the winger down here has plenty of space. The other one is marked, but that's just a general marking because the winger moved to the inside because the ball is on the other side. Now switching to the sub tactic with man marking, you can immediately see that both wingers are now tightly being followed by my fullbacks. Now what would happen if we were to man mark the winger from the other side? If your opponent changes sub tactic and switches them, this could happen. Here, this is the normal tactic, so no marking is being applied yet. If I switch to the sub tactic, you can actually see that the fullbacks attempt to reach their marking target. Interestingly, since it took so long to get there, Wan-Bissaka didn't make it in time, which let Cannavaro take the outside position of the supposedly marked opponent and Wan-Bissaka the position on the inside. Now, when you're in possession, no marking is applied, as it is a defensive instruction. The problem about this is that when you have the ball, not only are the players not marking, but they're also in their positions of the game plan. Now, if you lose the ball, they have a long way to go because their marking target is on the other side of the field. This can result in your players being in the middle of their way while both wingers actually remain unmarked, which is horrible. To avoid this, you can use tight marking instead, where you only select the opponent's player but not your player. Then, even if your opponent were to use a sub tactic, the game will just let whoever is near the opponent do the marking. In my opinion, marking isn't quite as powerful as it used to be before 4.4, but still a good option. Sometimes tight marking might work differently than man marking. Here, for example, you can see the tight marked winger. It's not Cannavaro doing the marking though, but one of my midfielders. This can be a disadvantage because obviously Cannavaro has way better defensive stats than the midfielder. Also, down here, you can see that Belletti isn't quite as close to Vinicius as he would be when man marking. I don't know if this was changed recently, it might also just be a one-off. Continuing this, Belletti is actually pretty close, so is Cannavaro. Continuing further, we can now see that Belletti is very close to Vinicius, whereas nobody's marking the other winger. As said, might be a one-off, might have been changed at some point, might just been me not having seen this before because I usually use man marking, but this is an interesting difference. It seems that with tight marking, defenders sometimes won't move out as far, especially if the ball is on the other side and the winger on their side is no immediate threat. Man marking, unlike the tight marking I've just shown, works differently to this. You can clearly see here, as soon as I lose the ball, the markers will immediately move close to their target. Even in Cannavaro's case up there, he's very close, which he wasn't while tight marking. This leads us to the next question. Can man marking be bad? Oh yes, it absolutely can. I've actually covered this before in a different video. I will just show you a shortened version of this here because it really fits. So I wasn't really sure whether I should man mark his second strikers because it might give his approaching midfielders too much space. So at this point I was sure the man marking was a mistake, and here's why. Exactly as I said in the beginning, my opponent's midfielders get way too much space. My side defender is dragged out, leaving a massive gap that Hulit can exploit. So yeah, man marking can backfire. What about more unusual ways of man marking? For example, using a central midfielder like Goretzka to mark a striker. Oh, rest in peace, man. Additionally, we assign the other central midfielder, Leimer, to mark the opponent's attacking midfielder, Soboslai. As usual, we need to lose the ball for the marking to come into effect. For the CMF marking the striker, it seems to work pretty well. The CMF marking the opponent's AMF, however, seems to get dragged out of position sometimes instead of marking close, like here. Also, he sometimes just straight up doesn't mark, but stays back instead, like here. Here again, the distance between Lima and the player he's supposed to mark is quite big. Too big in my opinion. Marking attackers with your midfielders worked quite well for me though, as shown with Goretzka. Just be careful that it doesn't open up space in other places. Like if Goretzka would either move too far back in relation to your backline, or it would generally just be missing in midfield. Let's stay with defenders and see how instructions actually alter their behavior. For a start, we check out how the attacking fullback differs from the defensive fullback. On the right side, with a defensive fullback, you can already see that there is no support coming. Wan-Bissaka just stays back. If we move forward at the minimap, we can see how far up the defensive fullback will come. Remember this, it's gonna be important. Switching sides now, we discovered two things. The obvious one, which is the attacking fullback starting the run, and the subtle one, which I didn't know either, which is that his run actually doesn't start when the ball is on his side of the field, but earlier, as long as the game knows the ball will end up in his half. As you see, attacking fullback attacks all the way, probably no news for you. Now what if we give the attacking fullback a defensive instruction? Will he act the very same way as a defensive fullback then? The answer is no. See, he does not attack anymore. But here's the thing, look how far back he is despite the ball being on his side. He is, in fact, more defensive than the defensive fullback. Now the big question is, what if we give a defensive fullback a defensive instruction? Does that do anything? Oh yes it does. The map clearly shows that the player doesn't move up at all, meaning the defensive fullback does have an offensive run, which is cancelled by the instruction. Remember, this is how far he came up without the defensive instruction. It shows that defensive instructions remove any kind of offensive runs from defenders. And this can be important. If you, for example, play 3 at the back and an outside center back is a build-up playstyle, he will often move up like this. While this can be a valid option for some playstyles, most of the time it will absolutely backfire because the defender leaves a gap behind, which this guy is looking forward to. The defensive instruction would solve this. Some other widespread positioning option is to use only 1 fullback and 3 center backs. Let's check the impact of this. As you can see, the defender is a lot more central now, and this is actually why people do this, because most players spam attacks through the middle. If we change to the sub tactic, where Wan-Bissaka is no center back anymore, but a fullback without any instruction, he will do the slight forward run we've seen from before. What's important to know here is that if you place the side center back more towards the center on the game plan, it will actually make him be more in the center in the game. Now let's check the opposite, whether a defensive fullback with an attacking instruction moves the same way as an attacking fullback. And again, the answer is no, no. What we have to focus on here is the current position of this player, the left fullback. He's just as far back as the other defenders. Now moving up there, we can see the normal run we're used to from an attacking fullback. But if we check the other side now, the defensive fullback with an attacking instruction is way further up, despite the ball not being in his half. That's a massive difference. If we move over to him, he starts running forward, showing that the attacking instruction actually gives him a different offensive pattern. Let's check out now whether an attacking fullback with an attacking instruction is even more offensive. So what we see here is that the defensive fullback with an attacking instruction is further up than the attacking fullback with an attacking instruction. However, this is because the ball is on the lower side of the field. If I move the ball up into the upper half, it turns around and the attacking fullback is further up. I do think overall the attacking fullback is a bit more offensive. Looking here, the defensive fullback is very far back when the ball is not on his side. If we move to the other side, we can see that the attacking fullback on the other side does not come as far back. As for the offensive runs, both will just move forward as soon as the ball is in or on the way to their side. Moving the ball up, attacking fullback with attacking instruction runs. Moving the ball back, defensive fullback with an attacking instruction runs. It really seems like the attacking fullback behaves a bit more offensively overall. To make this come complete, let's see what happens when we give attacking to a center back. It's pretty obvious already. Cannavaro moves up quite a bit. He moves up that far that the midfielder even drops further back, so my player on the ball has a close option. Let's check out how the positioning changes in the game if we put the left midfielder a bit wider, one of the CMFs very far back, the other one very far up, and the right midfielder very narrow. As usual, we keep comparing to this formation, which we started with. You can see here, Lima is coming close to be an option, whereas the other CMF, Goretzka, stays further up. Since they are the same playstyle and the same hate at the game plan, I assume the game just sends back whoever is closer to the ball carrier. In this case, Lima. The other CMF moves forward, sometimes a bit further, and sometimes he drops a bit. If we change to the sub tactic now, Lima immediately charges forward despite being closer to the ball, and Goretzka comes back to be the close option. This would not happen naturally. We can absolutely see the game plan working here. Switching back to the regular 4-4-2, Lima now drops just like Goretzka did before. Switching back again to the sub tactic where Lima is a lot further up in the game plan, he still stays back this time. So in general, the game plan does seem to have an impact in terms of who of them does what, but the more offensive one will not always stay as offensive as in the game plan. On the way forward, we do see that despite both being box-to-box CMFs, Lima is clearly the more offensive one. If there's a free path for him, which there is because I dragged Makai back, he will do a final run. If Makai would be up there, Lima would also drop back. About the outside midfielders, they did change when switching tactics, but it was so insignificant I didn't look into it any further. It would just make the video even longer. So what if we use a defensive midfielder and put him further up on the game plan than the central midfielder? Who of them will drop back? For me, the defensive midfielder did, and not only that, he also dropped back further than when he was a central midfielder. As you can see, under some circumstances, he even drops behind the center back. In terms of offense, the game plan actually seems to matter, because the DMF is always a bit further up than the CMF. This could be down to chance, my movements, or the opponent's players though. What we can say for sure though, that we can make the defensive midfielder make a final run. It's not very likely to happen, but if we take the striker Makai out of his position and then kind of hunt Goretzka forward, he will do a final run once up far enough. What happens if we put a central midfielder far up and further than an attacking midfielder? This time, the central midfielder comes back, but not as far as the defensive midfielder did before. This basically means that the registered position in the game plan seems to matter for who is coming back, and if they are the same position, it seems that the one further back is more likely to also come back on the pitch. In terms of attacking, Goretzka, being an attacking midfielder, obviously makes the final run just naturally on his own without being forced. But again, all these are just tests that rely on so many factors, so there might be different outcomes in edge cases, or they might patch something and it's differently again, you never know. Will switching side midfielders to attacking midfielders make a big difference? When standing back here and switching tactics back and forth, there really isn't a notable pattern. They're just doing the same thing. When moving up to them, they are attacking midfielders right now, we can see that at this point they start their final runs. We move up again to see what they do as side midfielders. Almost at the very same spot, they start doing their final runs. It might have been a bit earlier than before, so I actually went and tested again just to be sure, and Hoeneß again starts his final run at about the same spot as the first time. Even when standing here and alternating between the two tactics, they don't move. So this suggests that the registered position on the game plan does not have a noticeable impact for SMF versus AMF, but the team playstyle and the player playstyle do. We had defenders, we had midfielders, let's move to strikers and see if they behave differently if not placed at same height. So in general, I'd say how far up your strikers actually go depends on how far towards them the opponent's defenders move. Even though my strikers players are not at the same height in the game plan, they are exactly at the same height right now. Now if we look here, we can actually see that Makai, the one supposed to be further up, is closer while Tell makes a run. However, I believe this has nothing to do with the game plan, but with the fact that in this situation, the closer striker comes close and the further away striker goes for a run. If we switch to the lower half of the field, we see the opposite. Tell comes close, Makai goes for a far run. It seems that Tell stays back for a little bit longer, but it could just be by chance. So yeah, not sure if there is any notable pattern related to the game plan here. Makai is the best player in the game, by the way. Let's see if the change of the width actually has an impact in the game. This one is super obvious. If you place your strikers further apart from each other in the game plan, it will also translate into the game. You can also see that if I switch to a normal tactic, they move back to the middle again. Something I haven't talked about yet is the deep line instruction. The classic use for it is giving it to a defensive midfielder who will then join the defensive line. As you can see here, Lima drops deep into the defensive line. You can also give your side midfielders a deep line instruction, which will put them back into the defensive line when the opponent has the ball, just like the defensive midfielder before. Now what you should know is that the width of the players that you give to deep line instruction depends on where in the defensive line they will take their place. If I put Pirlo and Griezmann further inside than my outer center backs are, they will take the inner positions in the defensive line. As you can see, they are not on the outside now, but between the inner center back and the respective outer center back. Now what happens when we give a striker a deep line instruction? Will he run all the way back? Let's try with the best player in the game by far, Roy Mackay. It's actually pretty simple. He doesn't run back into the defensive line, but into the midfield line, meaning that deep line will always move a player one line towards the back. Forwards drop into the midfield, midfielders drop into the defense. This also works for wingers, which drop back into the midfield. The next instruction, anchoring. Anchoring is super weird. I'm not sure it actually works the way it's supposed to be. What I did here is I gave anchoring to Bernardo and used two defensive midfielders to make sure nobody gets in his way. Now what anchoring is supposed to do is make sure a player does not move too far to the side of his original position. This is Bernardo and anchoring is active right now, so he stays very central. If I switch to the sub tactic and anchoring is off, he will move over here. If I switch back, he's tied to the center again. One would think that if you gave anchoring to wingers, they would stay outside. Yeah, they don't. As I said, it's kind of weird. The only real world use case scenario I've come across so far is in my last formation guide, where if you use a box-to-box instead of orchestrator Pirlo here, you might want to use anchoring to avoid him drifting out to the wings. In my formation guide, I have explained how the game processes the different attacking lanes and how orchestrators and box-to-box players approach them differently each. So if you want to know about this, the link is in the description. The last instruction is counter target. You all know about this, right? It's pretty straightforward. If you give it to a player, he will not try to get the ball from the opponent, but kind of idle. On top of that, they can also not be called for pressure. Useful when you want to preserve stamina or avoid them getting out of position. That's it, folks. Let me know if you liked this video. I'd love if you subscribed, liked, or commented. Until then, guys, take it easy. Shaka!